Good morning and welcome to our online Sunday services at First Unitarian Church of St. Louis. Hello, my name is Andrea Barron and I go by she, her, hers. And I'm so glad to see all of you here this morning. I especially want to welcome any visitors or newcomers. If you are new to our congregation, please fill out a newcomer form found at the link in the chat window. In the chat, you can also find a few other useful links, including today's order of service, our YouTube channel where service recordings are posted each week, and information about our religious education program for families with children. We are excited to announce that closed captioning is now available within Zoom. To turn captions on or off, simply click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitle or Hide Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the text by clicking on Subtitle Settings. We invite you to light your own chalice at home when we come to the chalice lighting portion of the service. If you don't have a chalice, you can use a candle. We're also looking for members, friends, and families to record chalice lightings for worship. See your e-news for details. I have a few announcements this morning. With new COVID restrictions in place, we have postponed our weekly social witness for Black Lives Matter until it is safer to gather. If you are visiting First Unitarian, we invite you to stay in the main Zoom room after the service for a newcomer session with Reverend Kim. Our thanks to Sue Fazio serving as tech volunteer this morning. Now, since one of the important aspects of worship is being present in community, we invite you to continue this moment of welcome by switching to gallery view and turning on your webcams to wave to each other. We're keeping everyone muted, but feel free to type your greetings in the chat. It's so good to see all of you. Now, please turn off your webcams again and feel free to return to speaker view. Welcome to this religious community where we affirm the dignity and freedom of all who enter. Here we seek to live together in relationship and respect so that we may embrace and celebrate our differences. Our religious values invite us to a shared journey of truth and meaning. Sincerity and connection guide our religious community and call us into deeper association with ourselves and our world. Welcome. We are glad you are part of our community this morning. Now please enjoy Prelude and Fugue in F minor by Vincent Lubeck, performed by our organist Earl Naylor.
Good morning. I am the Reverend Kim Mason, she, her, hers, and I serve this congregation as your minister. It is good to be with you this morning, particularly on this cornbread communion. In this month of healing, we spend today thinking about how our gifts can heal the world. I invite you into worship with these words from the poet Nikki Giovanni. I grow old, though pleased with my memories. The tasks I can no longer complete are balanced by the love of the tasks gone past. I offer no apology, only this plea. When I am frayed and strained and drizzle at the end, please someone cut a square and put me in a quilt that I might keep some child warm and some old person with no one else to talk to will hear my whispers and cuddle near. Come, let us worship together. Please join in singing our hymn of the month, number 317, We Are Not Our Own.
We are not our own, earth forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, earth names us, past and present peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liberties of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
I will read our chalice lighting words, and I invite you to light your chalice or candle along with the video at the end. Our words are from Crystal Hogan. We light this chalice to honor our work, to celebrate our community, and to bring hope and determination to our mission in the wider world. This morning's stories are told with permission by Scholastic Press. We begin with the quiltmaker's journey. There once was a young woman who lived in a town surrounded by a great stone wall. She had never seen the outside, but the town elders warned that there was something out there that was too awful to speak of. Because all the people of the town were rich, the girl thought the same was true of everyone in the world. Her parents had died and left her everything she needed or wanted. The house she lived in was so tall it cast a shadow on the other houses. Every meal was a feast, yet she was as unhappy as she was rich. She often would visit with the seamstress, who taught her how to make pretty things with cloth and thread. One day, as they sat together in the sewing room, the seamstress could see that the girl was sad and asked her,
What is it that makes your mouth turn down so?
"Oh, I don't know. I have everything anyone could ever want, and yet, even with so much, my heart feels empty. I feel I'm meant to do something important with my life, but I just don't know what it is."
Don't worry, said the seamstress as she hugged her. You'll find your way.
Now, ever since she was young, the girl had been known for her bravery, and it has always been said that far below the town hall there was a secret passageway that would lead to the world beyond the wall. One night, the girl decided to see for herself. She crept down the stairs below the sleeping city until she came to the bottommost cellar. There was a door, and above it a sign that read, "All who pass here shall never return." The girl turned the knob, pushed open the door, and went through. The air was freezing and spider webs hung from ceiling to floor. She heard rats rattling in the darkness and bats squeaking to one another. Still, she went on, through the gloomy passageway and to the other side of the wall, and what she saw was terrible indeed. There were people in ragged clothes. Some lay on the ground without a bed or blanket. Others cried of hunger. She saw houses too old and to keep a body warm, and children who had run out of tears to cry. She went on expecting to see a dragon or something, but there was nothing of the sort. The world, she sadly realized, was not as she thought it was. Tired, the girl lay down to sleep. But when she awoke, she discovered she'd gone so far that she had no idea where her town was anymore. Still, she knew she must be strong and started on her way. All along the way, she found the people she'd been afraid of were kind to her. They were happy to help her in any way. If they had little in their pantries, they gave what they could. If they had nothing, they gave from their hearts. When she had gone a long time with nothing to eat, she found an apple tree with a few pieces of fruit left. She gathered the apples in her skirts to save until night. She'd not gone far when she passed an old woman sleeping beside the road. She felt badly for the woman, so she left an apple for her to find when she woke. Then down the road there was someone else, and then another. To each she gave an apple until she had none. But the young girl realized she no longer felt hungry. Instead, she was full of happiness. She felt from the little gifts she had given. Now she saw the world as it truly was, and she needed to face the town elders.
I wonder what will happen when she faces the town elders. One of the gifts that we give to each other when we find one another in sorrow or in gladness is listening to each other. We do that each week by sharing our joys and concerns. This week, we celebrate with Bob and Kathy Rosinski on the announcement of the birth of their 10th grandchild, Luca Gerard Bilic. Parents, daughter Liz and husband Derek, are very happy and doing well. And we send our deep condolences to Carl Bassi and family. Carl's mother passed away earlier this month. And we offer our sincere sympathy to Tom Craddock, whose brother also passed away this month. As we pause in a moment of quiet reflection, I invite you to type any sorrows or concerns you are experiencing into the group chat box. A nephew-in-law who died from COVID this week. Sadness at 250,000 deaths from COVID. Feeling numbness. Concern for a colleague who tested positive for COVID and other staff who may have been exposed. A friend advancing through lung cancer, and another friend with COVID. We carry much worry and sadness right now. Anxiousness about Thanksgiving, how we will celebrate in these different ways, and concern for healthcare providers and the burden that they carry during this pandemic. Concern for families dealing with COVID and the financial loss that is happening, the many ways that this pandemic is rippling out. We hold these sorrows with tenderness and compassion. May they be lighter because they are shared. And as a community, we also share our joys with one another. I invite you to type any joys you wish to share into the group chat box. We celebrate the COVID-safe webcasted wedding ceremony of a family friend. Gratitude for the ability to continue working and providing for family. The joy of being part of many families, biological family of choice and church family. Gratitude for a Thanksgiving break. Appreciation for the virtual graduation of a granddaughter and being able to participate. Gratitude for meaningful work that is able to be adapted to COVID and be of service during this pandemic. Appreciation for students. And I'll add teachers. So much learning has changed this year. Appreciation for a sense of humor. Joy at having a daughter home for the rest of 2020. Appreciation for making music with choir people and for families in good health. These joys, big and small, are what keep us resilient during this very challenging time that we are living through. May we hold these joys with gladness and celebration, and may they be magnified by their sharing. With many joys and concerns remaining unspoken in our hearts and minds, please join me in a moment of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life and love, holy within and among us, in this time of uncertainty, we seek the reassurance of connection and the thread of hope. Our lives, like this community, are a patchwork quilt of moments and memories sewn together by love. We can see the places where misuse has damaged the stitches, where time has worn the fabric, but the pattern remains, as to the meaning. Each piece is a reminder of struggle or success, and a marker of gratitude. Spirit of life and love, great mystery, as we prepare for the coming hibernation of both winter and pandemic, may we remember our place in this quilt. Let its memories keep us warm. Let its meaning bring us comfort. Let the thread of love that binds each piece keep us safe in the weeks ahead. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.
We left the young woman just as she decided to return to her town and tell the elders what she discovered. She walked on, and finally she found the town. Her return was a miracle, and a celebration was announced. But before it could begin, the young woman marched straight to the town hall and spoke for a long time about all the people who lived outside the town and needed their help.
I'm sorry. Let's try that again. I'll just ignore the poor, said one of the elders. If they wanted to be rich, well, then they shouldn't have been born poor. Now, my dear, you should know that if you don't look at those people, then you don't have to think about them.
Well, she said, I can never be happy when there are so many people in the world with so little. She told them she decided to leave the town so she could help people.
A clamor arose. If you go, said one of the elders, know this, you shall lose all you own and never be allowed to return.
But she knew what was in her heart, and she knew what would finally bring her happiness. So she walked away, and she carried nothing but the clothes she wore and the ring that her mother had given her long ago. She wandered on, wondering what gift, if any, was hers to give. One dawn, as she neared another strange town, she discovered a mother and son huddled in a doorway, shivering in their sleep. The young woman wanted to cover them with something warm, but neither had a blanket nor a coat. And then at last she knew what she could do. As soon as the shops opened, she sold her beloved ring and bought needles and thread and cloth. Looking just the right place to work, a great mountain drew her upon its shoulders. Here the trees gently swayed and waved a welcome in the wind. Beneath one she found the perfect place for her work. Someone long ago had made a chair out of stones. Right away she set to work. The young woman decided to make a quilt for the mother and son. It had been one most certainly that was very warm, but it had to be something else as well. It must be beautiful. So beautiful that the quilt would make the two feel loved. The young woman was afraid she couldn't make the quilt of her dreams, but she worked and worked, and as time passed, it seemed as though something magical had touched her. In this way, slowly the quilt came to be. Though she had wondered how she'd be able to live with nothing she need not have, animals brought her gifts of nuts and berries. A flock of birds swarmed overhead to shelter her whenever it rained. And sure enough, out of the hours and bits of cloth and thread, a lovely quilt came to be. When it was ready, she put the quilt under her arm and set off for town to look for the mother and son. The quilt maker found the two asleep, and careful not to wake them, she wrapped her gift tightly around them. Both mother and son woke with a start and cried with delight at so marvelous a gift. They would never know who had made this gift for them, because the quilt maker didn't think it important. All they'd be sure of, like many, many others in the years to come, was that someone, somewhere in the world, cared for them. And so, having found her way and her gift, the quilt maker settled on the mountain she loved so well. When finished with each quilt, she left her gifts of warmth and hope in the hands of someone in need. She worked steadily through the seasons of the passing years on her wonderful quilts, knowing she had discovered everything she'd ever need to be happy.
This morning's reading is a dialogue between two characters in the movie Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist.
Here we go. Tikkun olam.
Exactly. Basically, it says that the world has been broken into pieces. All this chaos, all this discord. And our job, everyone's job, is to try to put the pieces back together to make things whole again.
You believe that?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know how the world broke, and I don't know if there's a God who can help us fix it. But the fact that the world is broken, I absolutely believe this. Just look around us. Every minute, every single second, there are a million things you could be thinking about, a million things you could be worrying about. Our world, don't you feel we're becoming more and more fragmented? I used to think that when I got older, the world would make so much more sense. But you know what? The older I got, the more confusing it is to me, the more complicated it is, harder. You'd think we'd be getting better at it, but there's just more and more chaos. The pieces, they're everywhere, and nobody knows what to do about it. I find myself grasping, Nick. You know that feeling? That feeling when you just want the right thing to fall into the right place, not only because it's right, but because it will mean that such a thing is still possible. I want to believe in that.
Do you really think it's getting worse? I mean, aren't we better off than we were 20 years ago or 100?
We're better off, but I don't know if the world's better off. I don't know if the two are the same.
You're right.
Excuse me?
I said you're right.
But nobody ever says you're right, just like that.
Really.
Really?
Maybe we're the pieces.
What?
Maybe that's it. With what you're talking about before, the world being broken, maybe it isn't that we're supposed to find the pieces and put them back together. Maybe we're the pieces. Maybe what we're supposed to do is come together. That's how we stop the breaking.
Tikkun olam.
Tikkun olam, to repair the world. It is the mission of the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis to work for love, decency, tolerance, and justice. In this time of pandemic, the church continues in that mission. The building is closed, but the church is open. We are not passing a physical plate, but there are many ways to donate, including by mail, online, or with our Text to Give program. These are uncertain times. Please give as you can.
Okay, and now we return to the quilt maker some years later in The Quilt Maker's Gift. A long time passed, and people came to know the quilt maker and her beautiful gifts. Many people came hoping to buy one of her quilts, but she would not sell them.
They're not for the rich, she said.
On dark and cold nights, the woman would come down the mountain to the town to find someone sleeping outside and gift them with a beautiful quilt. Now, at this time, there also lived a very powerful and greedy king who liked nothing better than to receive presents. The hundreds and thousands of gifts he got for Christmas and his birthday were never enough. So a law was passed to celebrate his birthday twice a year. Over the years, the king came to own many of the prettiest things in the world, and yet the king was not happy at all. Somewhere there must be one beautiful thing that will finally make me happy, he was often heard to say. One day, a soldier rushed into the palace with news about a magical quilt maker who lived in the mountains. The king stamped his foot. "And how is it that she has never given me one of her quilts?" he demanded. And off they set for the mountains.
When they arrived at her house, the quilt maker merely laughed. "My quilts are only for the poor and needy."
"I want one of those quilts," the king demanded. "It might be the one thing that will finally make me happy."
The woman thought for a moment. "Make presents of everything you own," she said, "and then I'll make a quilt for you. With each gift that you give, I'll sew in another piece."
"Give away all my wonderful treasures?" cried the king. The king was now very angry. He marched the woman down through the town and chained her to a rock in the cave of a sleeping bear. "I'll leave you here, and when the bear awakens, I'm sure he will make a very fine breakfast of you."
Later, when the bear's eyes opened and he saw the woman in his cave, he gave a roar that rattled her bones. She looked up at him and sadly shook her head. "It's no wonder you're so grouchy," the quilt maker said. "You've nothing but rocks on which to rest your head at night. Bring me an armful of pine needles, and with my shawl, I'll make you a great big pillow." And that is what she did. No one had ever been so kind to the bear before. So he broke the chains and asked her to spend the night.
Mike, how did you get in the story, by the way? Anyway. Now, although the king was very good at being greedy, he was very bad at being mean. And all that night, he could not sleep for thinking about the poor woman in the cave. So he woke up his soldiers, and they all marched in their pajamas up to the cave to save her. But when they arrived, the king found the quilt maker and the bear having a breakfast of berries and honey. Now the king completely forgot about feeling sorry and became angry all over again. He ordered the royal island makers to build an island barely big enough for the woman to stand on her tiptoes. Once again, the king asked her for a quilt, and once again, she said no. "Very well," the king replied. "Tonight, when you're too tired to stand, you'll drown."
Later, the quilt maker saw a sparrow flying across the Great Lake. A cold, fierce wind was blowing, and it did not look like the poor bird would make it to shore. The quilt maker called to him, and he stopped to rest on her shoulder. The poor, tired sparrow was shivering, so the woman quickly made him a coat. When he was warmed and the wind had stopped, the bird flew off. But he was very grateful to the quilt maker for what she had done. Soon the sky darkened as the air filled with a huge cloud of sparrows. Thousands of wings beating together, they swooped down, lifted the woman in their little beaks, and carried her safely to shore.
Again that night, the king could not sleep for thinking about the woman alone on the island. So, woke up his sleepy soldiers again, and they marched in their pajamas down to the lake to set the woman free. But when they arrived, she was sitting on a tree limb, sewing coats for all of the sparrows. "I give up," the king shouted. "What must I do for you to give me a quilt?"
As I said, the woman answered, "Give away all of the things you own, and I'll sew a quilt for you."
"I love all my wonderful, beautiful things," cried the king.
"But if they don't make you happy," the woman replied, "what good are they?"
"All right," he finally muttered. "If I must give away my treasures, then I must."
I don't know how many of you have ever visited another Unitarian Universalist congregation. I see some hands. One of the features of many UU churches is an art gallery. We even have a small art gallery space in our building. These spaces are most often used to display two-dimensional art, photographs, paintings, drawings, prints, etc. However, in one church I worked at, there was an annual quilt month. For 1 month each year, the vertical surfaces throughout the building were draped in family heirlooms and craft projects and rummage sale treasures, like the antique quilt sewn entirely inside another newer top. It would be easy to dismiss this tradition, pieces of fabric hanging on a wall, even if you didn't know that some of them are worth thousands of dollars. But the longer I do this work, the more I find myself drawn to the metaphor of the quilt. Each of us, an individual piece, is part of the larger pattern of the quilt. A quilt as a metaphor for the church. Some quilts use traditional patterns, and others are representational art. Quilts can tell stories, and quilts can serve as specific functions. Different parts of the quilt require different types and styles of fabric and thread. Some quilts were made out of necessity and invention, and others were meticulously planned and crafted. Just like a congregation, a quilt takes individual pieces and connects them, bringing them together to form a larger and more beautiful whole. In the reading from Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, the characters wondered if we are the pieces that are supposed to come together in order to repair the world. Tikkun Olam. There are many interpretations of Tikkun Olam, or world repair, from simple community service to radical social justice to specific Jewish legalese. The most common interpretations come out of the mystical traditions of Judaism and focus on our shared responsibility to create a better world. According to Jennifer Knopperstock, Assistant Vice President at the Associated, quote, "The modern and broadly understood notion of Tikkun Olam is that of repairing the world through human actions. Humanity's responsibility to change, improve, and fix its earthly surroundings is powerful. It implies that each person has a hand in working toward the betterment of his or her own existence, as well as the lives of future generations. Tikkun Olam forces people to take ownership of their world. It is them, not God, who will bring the world back to its original state of holiness." Repairing the world, returning to wholeness. This can be done by participating in both justice and righteousness, tzedakah, as well as acts of loving kindness, gemilut hadasam. Hasad, I'm not pronouncing that well. Gemilut hasadam. Our stories today are examples of Tikkun Olam. The quilt maker sought to right a wrong, to use her gifts to make life better for others. And in turn, it has inspired the king. We'll see how that inspiration takes form when we finish the story in just a moment. Whichever they choose, each of their actions sows a bright thread of love through the actions of each person they touch. This week is Thanksgiving, the time when we celebrate the gifts that we have with gratitude. We find ourselves living in a nation sorely divided and a world riddled with a multitude of afflictions. I wonder what it would look like if we all metaphorically took up quilting, if we looked for ways to use our gifts to help, if we sought threads of connection to bring people together. We might, in the words of the earlier reading, stop the breaking. We might repair the world. We might even repair ourselves. Let's find out what the quilt maker and the king have to say about that.
So the king went to his castle and searched from top to bottom for something he could bear to give away. He finally came out with a single marble, but the boy who received it smiled so brightly in return, the king went back for more. Eventually, he brought out a pile of velvet coats and went about the town giving them to people. All were so pleased that they marched up and down the street in a grand parade. Then the king ordered his merry-go-round with real horses to be brought out. Children cried with delight and cartwheeled around him. And just the smallest of smiles began to show on the king's face. The king looked about him and saw the dancing and merrymaking and all the happiness his gifts had brought. A child took a hold of his hand and pulled him into the dance. Now the king really smiled and even laughed out loud. "How can this be?" he cried. "How can I feel so happy about giving my things away? Bring everything out. Bring it out all at once."
Meanwhile, the quilt makers started making a special quilt for the king.
So the king kept on giving and giving. When at last there was no one left in town who had not received something, the king decided to go out into the world and find others who might be in need of his gifts.
But before he left, the king promised the quilt maker he would send a sparrow back to her each and every time he gave something away.
Morning, noon, and night, the wagons rolled out of town, each piled high with the king's wonderful things.
Finally, one day, a weary sparrow flew into the quilt maker's window and perched on her needle. She knew then and there that it was the last messenger. So she put a final stitch in the quilt and set out in search of the king. After a long search, she finally found him. The king's eyes glittered with joy, and his laugh was wonderful and thunderous. The quilt maker unfolded the king's quilt from her bag. It was so beautiful that hummingbirds and butterflies fluttered about.
"What is this?" cried the king.
"As I promised you long ago," the woman said, "when the day came that you yourself were poor, then I would give you a quilt."
"But I am not poor," he said. "In truth, my heart is full to bursting, filled with memories of all the happiness I've given and received. I'm the richest man I know."
"Nevertheless," the quilt maker said, "I made this quilt just for you."
"Thank you," replied the king. "I'll take it, but only if you'll accept a gift from me. All these years I've saved it just for you." And from his wagon, the king brought out his throne. "It's just the thing for long days of sewing," said the king. From that day on, the king often came to the quilt maker's house. By day, the quilt maker sewed beautiful quilts she would not sell, and at night, the king took them down to the town. There he searched out the poor and downhearted, never happier than when he was giving something away.
It looks like our king found his gift, the act of giving to the world. Here at the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis, Cornbread Communion is one of the annual Thanksgiving traditions of this congregation. It is one of the gifts that we offer each other. Communion, while having specific liturgical and religious meaning, is also a communal meal. As Unitarian Universalists, we find meaning in communion as a sacred act of connection and sharing. It is our tradition that this meal is prepared as a gift to the congregation from the children. You see here pictures from last year's cornbread baking. In this pandemic year, many of our traditions have taken on new forms. The annual Friday cornbread baking and potluck became this year's virtual cornbread bake-off. It is our practice that once baked, the children process into the Sunday service with platters of cornbread and gallons of apple cider. This year, the procession looked a little different at the Saturday morning cornbread pickup. Once delivered, communion is then served to the congregation by the children and youth in a shared act of breaking bread. To offer an act of communion at Thanksgiving is to recognize the history of colonizing land where Native American Indigenous people lived. To offer a ritual of communion at this time is to honor the connections that exist within this congregation and among this community. Even when we cannot gather in person, we gather each week in this common space for this shared experience. Today, we come with many sources of bread. Some baked at home, some delivered, some picked up, some purchased. Whatever the source of your cornbread, we partake together. This cider and this cornbread we share in this space and in this moment. May the act of partaking together may this act of partaking together ground you in an act of communion with those who came before us, those who will come after us, and all those with us now. For these gifts and many others, we offer our gratitude. May the thread of love that unites this community move us to act with compassion for all those in need, and to remember all of the ways that we have gifts that might repair the world. Please join in our closing hymn, number 1010, One of Gratitude. We give thanks. We'll sing it twice through, the second time replacing the word time with the word food. Our closing words come from the Reverend Nancy Reed McKee. Our community knows no boundaries. We are not confined by the physical limits of walls, or for that matter, of what often binds us, restricts us, holds us back. We are freer than we know when we release ourselves and each other from expectations of what is needed for true community. We are here together in this space. I see you. I hear you. I love you. Go in peace. Amen and blessed be.